By the time Zara Quinn heard the beacon spin, the sky had turned the color of a bruise, and the incoming coordinates screamed, "Impossible." The storm hadn't broken yet. It just pressed its face against the chain link like a dog testing a fence, blowing grit through the hangar doors and turning the concrete floor into a thin sheet of dust that found the back of the throat. Inside Aegis Field, bodies moved with that practiced casualness that happens before chaos. Engines murmured, voices clipped, boots scuffed. It was another Thursday on the edge of the desert, where disasters were routed like commercial flights, and everyone pretended to be bored until the siren changed pitch. Sarah liked the pretending. It gave her time to work. She ran a lint-free patch through the bore of a trauma stapler, like other people cleaned rifles. The instrument gleamed, a small thing that wanted to be perfect. She checked the indicator lights, reseated the battery, and held it to her cheek. Warm. The maintenance bench around her was a landscape of small competences. Sutures neatly coiled in sterilized trays, gauze stacked by width, sailing bags indexed with a Sharpie so the labels faced one direction. Her hands moved without thinking, a slender right hand braced by a left that had steadied the injured and the terrified in field tents, where the only hot thing was the blood. Breathe, her mother would say, the shape of the word a rocking chair, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow the world to your speed. Zara set the stapler in its slot and tugged the case closed. The click satisfied in a way most congratulations didn't. On the wall above the bench, the composite fiber paneling vibrated as a forklift rumbled past, forks cradling 2 silver cases. She checked the manifest, made a small correction to a lot number, and traced the route with her finger. Hangar C, to the triage tent, to the helipad. A thin chain lay against her collarbone, tucked beneath a gray t-shirt darkened at the shoulder with an old oil stain. At its end were 2 small tags, one a worn brass coin with a dent in it, the other a medical caduceus stamped into stainless steel. She tucked them deeper. Outside, someone laughed at a joke that was probably less funny than the laugh tried to sell. The mostly male crew had that sound, chesty, performative, the bark of people who wanted their confidence heard by the walls. She'd been here 3 months and no one had yet asked what she used to fly. They were polite in that way that keeps you in a box. She picked up a roll of athletic tape and a marker. The tape was for wrists and ankles, and sometimes for the awkward feeling of a gun grip too smooth with sweat. The marker was for names, the one habit she'd never shaken from the dustier years, writing a patient's name on their own skin so the wind couldn't steal it. "Quinn," Cole Mercer said, his shadow arriving before his voice. He was broad, shorn to stubble, and wore a flightline vest like it was armor. "We're scrubbing the drone exercise. Weather's playing coy. Keep the med kit staged by the east door and tell Ops we need the generator warmed. Dawson's on his way." "Copy," she said, because there was nothing else to say to Cole that didn't turn into a conversation about proving something. The hangar doors trembled as a gust pushed them inward. Beyond them, the sky was a slab of steel being sanded by the wind. On the far side of the runway, a string of maintenance trucks glowed in amber. From the tower, the rotating beacon licked the tarmac, green, white, green, its sweep catching the ribs of an old airframe parked behind a fence like a museum piece. The way the light moved across it always felt like someone counting heartbeats. Zara crouched and rechecked the lower shelves of the trauma case, fingers sliding over inventory as if reading it in braille. Tourniquets, airway kits, naloxone, trauma shears, IV catheters, pressure dressings, chest seals. She pressed a thumb to the seam of a bag valve mask, looking for weakness, found none. Outside, the wind sung through the braces of the roof. She liked that song. It had rhythm. It was honest about what it wanted. Her father taught her about rhythm when she was still small enough to be hidden behind a range table. He was a ghost in a ghillie suit, a man who learned to turn his body into a tripod. Breathe in, breathe out, hold, squeeze. The bullet takes the breath, you give it. "Quinn," Cole again, closer. "You listening?" "I'm always listening," she said, standing. She lifted the first trauma kit, felt its weight, a familiar 21 pounds, and swung it onto her shoulder. "We're not heroes today." His mouth twisted, more mischief than malice. "We're careful. That's the order, no cowboying. Dawson's in a mood."
I don't cowboy. I plan. He grinned like that was the same thing and jerked his chin toward the east door. She carried the kits to the staging area where the concrete floor changed to a rubberized mat and the wind lost its teeth. As she set them down, she watched a trio of loadmasters guide a pallet jack under a crate stenciled with the Aegis emblem, a shield with a wave curling around it. The private security firm sold competence to cities that had mislaid theirs, and on days like this, the price rose with the gusts. She'd taken the job because Aegis Field sat between the hospital and the runway, between injury and the air, the seam where she could work without being watched by people who remembered too much about her past. "Zar!" called a voice she trusted. It was Ray Park, comm specialist, her hair in a looped braid that meant business. Ray was one of the few who didn't try to test Zara with questions phrased like compliments. "Ops wants 2 more litters by the birds. I'll cover your calls if Dawson starts doing his tours." "Thanks," Zara said, and meant it. "Any word on the Western Ridge?" "Just dust and egos," Ray said. "Weather says the wind's going to clock 20 degrees in the next hour. If it does, the approach becomes spicy." Zara squeezed the handle of the litter until her knuckles whitened. Spicy was code for, "You'll need eyes that can see the invisible." She checked the buckles and slung the webbing onto her shoulder. "Generators." "Warming," Ray said. "But we'll lose the upper repeater if the ridge takes a hit. I've got a backup mast ready." "You still know how to climb?" "I still know how to breathe," Zara said, and they both smiled, because that was an answer to everything. She took the litters to the pads. 2 high-skid helicopters sat there, like perched birds, rotors lashed, their cabs draped with sun covers that the wind now tried to convince into flight. She checked each tie-down, wrapping the last one around a cleat with 3 turns and a half-hitch. Her fingers were long, nails clean and cut short, movements precise with a grace born of practice rather than performance. A crew chief gave her a look that slid off her like rain off a tent, framed by the eyebrows of men who imagined competence as a currency only paid in bulk. She ignored it. She'd learned to be a solvent for that kind of thing. Let it hit, let it run, don't let it stick. Inside the medbay, a young tech nicked his thumb on a serrated clamp and hissed. Zara reached him through the narrow aisle like water finding a crack, took his hand, cleaned the cut with a crisp economy, and sealed it with a strip of adhesive that lay so even it could have been plotted. She checked his eyes. He was embarrassed, which meant he'd be sloppy if he went right back to the line. "Drink," she said, handing him a capped bottle. "Then, gloves that fit. Yours are too big." He blinked. "How did you—" "Your wrists," she tapped her own. "The bunching, it steals your sense of feel." He nodded, chastened, and she turned away before he found something performative to say as thanks. She moved to the diagnostics corner and woke the portable ultrasound like an old friend. The screen hummed, the probes warmed in their sleeve, and she ran the built-in calibration, adjusting for temperature drift. She adjusted gains, set presets, and named the profiles based on the way medics actually used them instead of the way engineers imagined they might. She left a sticky note with a small sketch showing where to set the midline for lung sliding. Her handwriting was neat, the kind that made staff nurses relax. The PA muttered once and then came alive, the voice of an air traffic controller in a mood. "Attention all, this is Tower, weather update in 5. All pilots, see Chief Dawson for wind advisories. Ground, secure loose equipment. Ops, confirm generator status." Zara looked to the far door, where Flight Chief Dawson's silhouette filled the frame, all collar and hands, and the stare of a man who'd flown long enough to know that charm has lift only in still air. He had the clean haircut of someone with a salon appointment rather than a barber, and he wore a watch that almost certainly cost more than the little hatchback Zara parked under the leaning eucalyptus tree.
He swept the room with his eyes, not missing much, and then raised his voice. "We cancel the drone run. We go into standby for evac. If the ridge comes down, we're on for out-and-back sweeps to the west settlements. If the hospital loses power, we ferry their backup generator. Questions?" The room watched him the way you watch a stage, wanting the cues. No one asked a question. Zara shifted her weight, the empty trauma case now light across her back, and felt the prickle in her palms that always arrived right before a day decided to become a story. She went back to the bench and opened the small tin she kept in the drawer, white grease and a short brush.
She cleaned the slider on a stubborn zipper and thought of that other brush, the one her father used to stroke the barrel of a rifle, whispering about patience like it was a god. She was slender, and the vest on the back of her chair looked like it would slide off if she moved too fast. Guarded, her last supervisor had written in a review, the word highlighted in yellow as if that made it helpful. Guarded was the way you carry water in a leaking canteen. Quinn. Ray's voice murmured through her earbud, a channel they used when the room was too loud with posture. Ops just got a ping from Fire Control West. Small outbuilding took a strike. No visible flame yet, but smoke in a line. They want eyes and hands. Dawson's sending a helo with a bucket and a small team. You want to ride as medic? Who's flying? Zara asked. Mercer and Harlow, Ray said. Harlow wants to stretch his hours before he tests for twin engine. Mercer said you can patch better than any of the new guys. Zara tasted the threat of wind again, and thought of the way heat moves in columns, rising through desert afternoons to turn sky into water. Tell them I'm in, she said. And tell maintenance the skid tie-down on Bird 2 needs a reweave. She pulled her kit and checked her pockets like a ritual. Headlamp, spare gloves, pressure dressings, chest seal, tape, trauma shears. She added the small pouch that held her own peculiar keepsakes, 2 safety pins, a cheap compass, 3 caffeine mints. Her mother's voice again. Load your pockets with the things the world forgets. The air at the helipad was needles and flour. Zara ducked under the rotor arc as if it was already spinning and moved to the frame, checking the floor anchors for the litter and the webbing. 2 twists, buckle, pull, snug. She said hello to the machine the way some people talk to dogs. Low, like respect. Cole Mercer climbed in after her, his grin visible through his dust mask. He said into his headset, "Don't expect any heroics. Quick trip, splash a little, make sure no one's trapped, and back in time to argue about who gets the good noodles." "I don't argue about noodles," Zara said, tightening the strap across the litter. Harlow, young and eager, did the walk around like he was courting the helicopter. His hands traced the blade cuffs and the fuel cap, and he paused to shoo a stray plastic bag that had found a way onto the pad. He caught Zara watching and offered a thumbs up that landed somewhere between professional and performative. They lifted into the wind with that particular flinch helicopters do, a shrug the size of a building. Zara felt the tail stir as Harlow worked the pedals, sensed the collective rise, the cyclic nudge. Her eyes moved to the gauges, because they always did. The habit was an old tendon. The red line of the ridge cut the horizon like a held breath. Zara watched the dust slide over it, a fog made of earth. The outbuilding was a small rectangle on the west settlement's fringe, its roof black with wet from the last storm, its walls cinder block that promised strength and delivered a kiln. As they approached, smoke peeled from a gash in the roof like a scarf. "Bucket drop first," Mercer said. "Then we put down on that flat and take a look. Harlow, keep her steady while I grab the cable." They swung the bucket, dunked it in the small reservoir, and drew a patient arc to the roof. The water fell like a curtain in a bad theater. Steam roared. Zara felt it in her teeth. They went around again. On the second pass, she saw movement at the door, a shape jerking then collapsing back inside, a figure pulling against something unseen. "Hold," she said, the word sharp enough to cut. Mercer tracked her gaze. "Damn, strap in." They touched skids onto a rectangle of dirt that pretended to be flat. Zara was out the door before the rotors finished their question. Heat slammed her like a body. She ducked low and ran, a silvered blanket under her arm, the trauma kit kissing her hip. At the door, smoke glassed the air. She went to her knees, pulled the bandana up over her nose, and slid in belly first, the blanket before her like a shield. The figure was a boy not yet old enough to have grown into his hands. His shirt had fused to his shoulder with melted paint. His eyes were enormous, and panicked in a way that made them look older than his face. His ankle was trapped under a collapsed shelf that had chosen exactly the wrong moment to be heavy. Zara pulled, found the lever point and lifted. It was a thing her father had taught her, using a rock and a stick. You can move the world if you stop thinking it cares about you. The shelf budged. The boy yanked his ankle free, then made a noise like a ship tearing. She covered his head with the blanket, wrapped the edges down his back, and told him a lie. "You're okay," in a voice that made it a kind of truth. She pulled him toward the door in stutters, breath timed to the smoke's cruel rhythm. Outside, the wind gudgeled the heat with greed. Mercer met him with the litter. Together they moved him to the Hello, where the air smelled like hot metal and dust instead of burnt paint and fear. Zara peeled the blanket, assessed, and went to work. Cool saline, dressings. She checked his airway and listened to the fragile ghost of breath. His ankle was angry but not broken. She wrapped it tight and tucked his foot into the angle of the litter like a secret. Harlow hovered and watched with eyes the color of a clean sky. "You ever get the itch?" "You move like you've done this before," he said through the intercom, an attempt at charm. Zara didn't look up. "I breathe," she said. "Help me with the straps." They ferried the boy to the settlement clinic, a building that had started life as a shipping container and decided to become something kinder. The nurse there took him with a mixture of gratitude and worry that meant she was alone. Zara left supplies they hadn't asked for because need rarely remembered to write its list. On the ride back, the wind shifted exactly as Ray had predicted. It clocked 20 degrees and then kept walking. Dust behaved like theater smoke, the kind that makes you forget there's a ceiling. Harlow concentrated, lips pressed thin, and Zara watched the needles and the horizon the way a person watches a sleeping child. "You ever get the itch?" Mercer asked, half to the cockpit, half to himself. "Which itch?" Harlow said, playing along because that made him look good through the pilot's mirror.
Harlow chuckled like a student in the front row. "When I pass my check, maybe." Zara didn't answer. She traced the faint hum of vibration with her fingertips along the bulkhead, eyes tracking cloud and light. When they touched down at Aegis Field, the storm finally made a sound worth its mass. The first raindrops struck the tarmac like thrown gravel. Men jogged to lash down anything jealous of flight. Ray's voice was in her ear. "Tower wants all non-essential movement stopped. We're in the soup. Also, Ops says the hospital's backup genset needs a kiss. Their primary just coughed. Dawson is hatching plans. You know how he hatches?" Zara packed her kit and stowed it in the medbay. She refilled the saline pockets, checked her needles, and taped a small blade to the underside of the lid, where her fingers could find it blind. Then she moved to the comms rack and checked the UPS units, flicking her eyes down the voltage, then the temperature, then the alarm history. She didn't belong to one team here. She belonged to what broke. Dawson strode in like weather with opinions. "We've got a window," he said to the room. "It's not wide, and it's not pretty, but it's there. Hospital power is unstable. If it goes flat and stays flat, we have infants and ventilators that stop being theoretical. The city's sending a convoy, but the west roads are a mess. The only thing that moves right now is air, if you know how to talk to it." He paused, enjoying his own metaphor. "I'm taking the Caravan," he said, meaning the Cessna 208 in Hangar B, a workhorse with a turboprop and a temper when it was hot. "We'll load the portable genset and a fuel bladder. We go hospital to field to hospital. 2 legs, then our window closes. Mercer, Harlow, you prep the load. I want wheels up in 20. "Whose right seat?" Mercer asked. Dawson turned his head toward the office glass, where a face peered and then pretended it wasn't. "Mendez is out sick. Booth can't keep his breakfast down in this soup. I'll take—" He scanned the room, eyes snagging on masks and stubble, and then pausing briefly on Zara. It wasn't that he didn't see her. It was that he saw a set of shapes his world didn't categorize as useful in the cockpit. "Ray," he said, "you can read a checklist without making it a poem." Ray lifted both hands. "I'm on the mast and the fallback link if the ridgeline repeater goes down. If we lose both links while you're out, you'll be talking to yourself." Dawson grimaced, like the room had offered him salad. "Fine."
Mercer, you want to sit right?" Mercer started to nod, then looked at Zara. It was a small motion, and it had weight. "Quinn's got steady eyes. If Ray is ground-bound, we need Cole with me on load. Harlow can hover, but he can't muscle the genset." Dawson's brows rose. "Quinn's a medic," he said, making the words sound like mascot. Zara kept her face still. "I'm also current on turbine power plants. I can read an engine like a story, and I don't throw up in chop." Someone snorted. She didn't look to see who. Dawson half smiled, half sneered. "You still remember how to fly," he said, the laugh inside the question warm enough to be cruel. Zara felt the air between her ribs expand and then get smooth. Breath in, breath out. The bullet takes the breath you give it. She said, "Enough to make it back." The room shifted. It wasn't a big shift, just weight moving like a boat when a passenger chooses a side. Dawson's gaze flicked to Mercer, calculating. He didn't want to be told he'd misread a person. He wanted someone to carry the blame if the window slammed. "Fine," he said, more to the clock than to her. "Quinn rides right seat. If you touch a switch without me telling you to do it, I will have you inventorying ballpoint pens for a month. Mercer, Harlow, you load. Ray, keep us talking. If the upper repeater goes, like the mast." Zara didn't smile. She didn't let the relief turn into anything visible. She followed Mercer to the hangar, the noise of the storm now a percussion that made everything feel like it had a pulse. The Caravan sat with its nose pointed at light, prop feathers aligned, wing roots beaded with old water. Inside, its seats were already removed to make room for cargo. They rolled the generator in on a cradle that complained, a rectangular heart that smelled like new paint and oil. The fuel bladder followed, straps biting into its shoulders like a reluctant animal. She checked the latches on the cargo net, cinched the load, and then did it again. The straps felt like sentence stems. She tightened them until the future had fewer options. Zara appeared in the doorway with 2 headsets and a laminated card. "HF and VHF freaks. If the tower goes blind, I'll be on backup. If the backup dies, I'll be yelling into the wind. We've got a portable in the Caravan, but it's moody." "Like Dawson," Mercer said. "Worse," Zara said, and grinned at Zara with that electrical warmth she saved for 3 people on Earth. "Be safe." Zara tucked the card into the pocket on her left thigh, the one that never betrayed her in a seatbelt. She glanced at the panel. The Caravan's instruments were a mix of digital with nostalgia. The primary flight display glowed a bland blue, attitude horizon crisp. She confirmed the altimeter setting against tower's numbers, cross-checked the GPS overlay, and then thumbed the discrete page to check if the last pilot had left breadcrumbs. Someone had. She smiled, just a little, because habits travel between strangers like contraband hope. Dawson climbed in with a sound like a man who wanted it known he had a body. He tossed his jacket back into the cargo area and buckled in with the casual arrogance of someone who could do it with his eyes closed and wanted you to imagine that. He watched Zara through the corner of his eye as she adjusted the seat to her length and set the rudder pedals so they would meet her feet instead of humiliating them. "Checklist," he said into the mic. "Battery on," she said, voice level. She touched nothing. She waited. If he wanted performance, he wouldn't get it. He would get process. He smirked and began. Zara followed, eyes and hands disciplined. Battery on. Avionics set. Fuel, selector both, quantity check. Beacon on. She flowed because that was how she was built. They started the engine. The turbine spooled with a hungry whine. NG rising, ITT alive and civilized. The prop bit air and chewed it with a deepening growl. The nose tugged like a dog that had seen a rabbit. Zara watched the needles and the annunciators, felt the slight tremor like a voice singing behind glass. She was careful with the mixture of looking and not looking that adults reserve for dangerous beauty. Dawson said into the mic. Taxi. Aegis Tower, Caravan 74 Alpha at Hangar B, VFR to City Hospital and back, request taxi. 74 Alpha, taxi to runway 26 via Alpha. Wind 210 at 28, gusting 35. Be advised, dust layers from surface to 3,000. Report back ready. Copy, Dawson said. He glanced at Zara. A quick test. You want to drive? Happy to steer, she said, keeping it boring. No smile, hands on the yoke, feet finding the pedals by memory that didn't need fans. They taxied. The caravan's mass moved over seams and puddles as if it wanted to remember what it had been before men gave it a name. The storm rapped on the windshield with fingers of silt. Along the taxiway, figures hunched and tugged at ratchet straps like sailors with bad news. The runway appeared as a darker ribbon in a field of gray. Its numbers were stenciled in a font that pretended the world was predictable. Run up, Dawson said. They anchored the brakes and raised the power. Gauges danced within their lanes. She checked each system, called each response without making it poetry. He glanced at her when she caught a lazy rise in oil temp and a lag in alternator 2's bite. She flicked the switch. The needle corrected. She said nothing. His smirk softened by half a degree. 74 Alpha ready, Dawson said to the tower. The controller exhaled into the mic. 74 Alpha, cleared for takeoff runway 26, fly runway heading, climb and maintain 2000. No traffic reported. Advise if you lose visual. Godspeed. Copy, Dawson said. He looked at Zara. A quick test. Your takeoff. She did not let the surprise touch her face. She repeated, my takeoff. They rolled. The caravan skated and then bit. Zara kept the center line by sheer insistence, feet quiet, yoke gentle. The wind tried to lift a wing. She held it down with thought and a breath her father had taught her. Airspeed alive. She called the numbers, eased back, and the ground let go like a reluctant hand. The storm smelled like pennies and old promises. They climbed into a sky that had decided to be complicated. Positive rate, she said. Gear is fixed, flaps coming up 1 notch. Good, Dawson said, surprise nearly but not entirely hidden. Turn to 270.
Drop a baza if you've ever been underestimated, a corner of her mind offered, the way clouds sometimes take the shape of things we can name. People like Ray made those asks during streams from the field when donors wanted stories. Zara didn't talk on those. She worked. Still, the thought eased the angle in her mouth. Below, the city crawled toward shelter. Traffic lights swung without conviction. The freeway glinted with trapped snakes. The hospital rose out of the gray with the stubbornness of a good idea. They circled once while Dawson asked for wind, for clearance, for a promise the storm couldn't make. They put the caravan down on the service strip behind the loading dock, the touchdown small enough to be polite in heavy shoes. The generator rolled out like a reluctant pet. Orderlies with eyes like overtime guided it under an awning while rain finally decided to turn honest. Zara carried the cable reel, showed an electrician how to kiss the contacts without making sporks into regret, and then shepherded their fuel bladder into a corner like she was closing a fence. An infant cried somewhere too close. The sound was need distilled. Zara looked up. The hallway was full of small things that mattered more than they looked. A pediatric nurse with panic at the edge of her teeth fought a pump whose screen flashed everything except help. Zara crossed to her, read the pump like a traffic sign, and pressed 3 buttons. The screen exhaled. The nurse blinked and then reached to touch Zara's forearm in a motion that had become thank you, only because words can be slow. Back to the runway, Dawson said, voice close now because he had appeared at her shoulder without breaking a sweat. We've got 1 more leg in this window. You okay to keep your hands on the wheel? She looked at him. His eyes acknowledged something they hadn't before. I'll keep them there, she said. They left with the rain coming down like it hadn't meant it earlier. The air was cooler, but angrier. The needles danced when they shouldn't have. Zara rechecked the alternators because she trusted motion less than she trusted silence. Both were in. The voltages were steady. The storm hissed at the windshield like a cat. Departure handed them off to Approach, who spoke like someone checking items on a list he hadn't written. 7-4 Alpha, maintain 3000. Expect moderate turbulence. Report field in sight. They climbed, the caravan stubborn in the climb like an old man getting off a couch. Zara scanned. Attitude, airspeed, vertical speed, altitude, turn coordinator, engine instruments. Outside for a world that had misplaced its edges. She wanted the runway to declare itself, like a friend waving from a crowd. Drop a baza if you've ever been underestimated, a corner of her mind offered, the way clouds sometimes take the shape of things we can name. People like Ray made those asks during streams from the field, when donors wanted stories. Zara didn't talk on those. She worked. Still, the thought eased the angle in her mouth. Below, the city crawled towards shelter. Traffic lights swung without conviction. The freeway glinted with trapped snakes. The hospital rose out of the gray with the stubbornness of a good idea. They circled once while Dawson asked for wind, for clearance, for a promise the storm couldn't make. They put the caravan down on the service strip behind the loading dock, the touchdown small enough to be polite in heavy shoes. The generator rolled out like a reluctant pet. Orderlies with eyes like overtime guided it under an awning while rain finally decided to turn honest. Zara carried the cable reel, showed an electrician how to kiss the contacts without making sparks into regret, and then shepherded their fuel bladder into a corner like she was closing a fence. An infant cried somewhere too close. The sound was need distilled. Zara looked up. The hallway was full of small things that mattered more than they looked. A pediatric nurse with panic at the edge of her teeth fought a pump whose screen flashed everything except help. Zara crossed to her, read the pump like a traffic sign, and pressed 3 buttons. The screen exhaled. The nurse blinked, and then reached to touch Zara's forearm in a motion that had become "thank you," only because words can be slow. "Back to the runway," Dawson said, voice close now because he had appeared at her shoulder without breaking a sweat. "We've got one more leg in this window. You okay to keep your hands on the wheel?" She looked at him. His eyes acknowledged something they hadn't before. "I'll keep him there," she said. They left with the rain coming down like it hadn't meant it earlier. The air was cooler but angrier. The needles danced when they shouldn't have. Zara rechecked the alternators, because she trusted motion less than she trusted silence. Both were in. The voltages were steady. The storm hissed at the windshield like a cat. Departure handed them off to Approach, who spoke like someone checking items on a list he hadn't written. 7-4 Alpha, maintain 3000, expect moderate turbulence, report field in sight. They climbed, the caravan stubborn in the climb like an old man getting off a couch. Zara scanned. Attitude, airspeed, vertical speed, altitude, turn coordinator, engine instruments, outside for a world that had misplaced its edges. She wanted the runway to declare itself, like a friend waving from a crowd. Drop a baza if you've ever felt the room doubt you, while your hands kept working, she thought, and the humor in it kept her heart from racing. Field should be just left of our nose, she said out loud. Wind will try to push us right. If we peel and turn now, we can set up a long final. But if the lights die, we'll be trusting the ghosts. Dawson nodded like he'd already decided and appreciated being agreed with. Turn to 180, he said. Descend at 2000. Keep it smooth. Don't chase the wild swings. She turned, and the caravan responded like a patient creature. The altimeter unwound with the dignity of a clock. The VSI dipped and then found its grace note. The windshield was a moving wall of gray with secrets behind it. Portable battery at 90%, Ray's voice said. I'm nursing it, but I can't promise I'll be here for your whole sermon. If I go quiet, aim for the place where my car usually leaks oil. Zara smiled despite herself. She could see that leak in her mind, a dark kiss on the concrete under the eucalyptus. She lined that memory up with the unseen runway until the match clicked in her bones. She dialed in a descent profile that would bring them to decision height without drama. The engine hummed like the world had always been mechanical. She held the yoke like a throat she was persuading to sing. Then the lights went out. The runway, the taxiways, the little jewelry of the field, everything that glowed went feral. The gray outside thickened until it felt like the inside of a sock. For a moment, the only light was the instrument panel and the tiny trembling glow from the portable radio's face. Approach, Dawson? Tried, for ritual.
Approach is a rumor, Ray quackled, and then the line thinned further. A hair in a hurricane. I can pulse the lights for one count if you're of the threshold. Tell me when. Zara exhaled and let the old math climb into her hands. Wind correction angle, ground speed without a ground, descent rate that met a place that might not exist. The father ghost at her shoulder steadying a rifle with breath, the mother ghost at the other shoulder counting compressions while she said someone's name over and over so they would know to stay. Now, Zara said. Out of the gray, a row of runway lights winked like a tossed handful of stars. 1 heartbeat, 2, 3. They vanished, but that glimpse had been enough. It had marked the world. It had said, here. She nudged the nose. She corrected for drift the way she corrected for hurt feelings. Ignore the whine, deal with the force. The altimeter ticked downward. The smile in Dawson's eyes was gone. In its place was calculation and a small, sharp fear he didn't broadcast well. He was a good pilot, but he had built his goodness inside systems that usually cooperated. Speed's good, Zara said. Power set, trim fine. He lose too much, we go around. We go around and we're in the soup with a portable radio and a runway that might stop being a runway. We keep it honest. We make one landing we can both live with. He stared at her for a fraction that felt like a handshake. Ray's voice was almost gone. One more pulse if you need it. Then I'm stealing power from the vending machine and the gods of cheap chips will judge me. Ready, Zara said. Now. The lights winked again. Briefer, shy. She caught the edge of the runway and the white line that was not a comfort so much as a dare. The wind shivered them sideways and she pressed a little more into the rudder, eased the aileron the way you tuck a sheet around a sleeping body. The VSI nodded like an old man. The radio choked and died. The primary nav screen went empty, then black. The backup stopped pretending. The panel lost a layer of its glow. In the glass, Zara saw her own eyes, calm, not because she was brave, but because being calm was the only thing that worked. She let the world narrow until it was the yoke, the throttle, the tiny slide of ball in the turn coordinator, the sound of the prop biting air, the tremble that told her they were close to soil and consequence. She pictured the runway, the way you picture a friend's living room in the dark and know where the table is. Dawson's breath sounded like a metronome that had lost faith. Hold her, he said, barely more air than word. I am, she said. And because nothing was listening that would take offense, she added, breathe. She rolled wings level,
felt the caravan's weight lean into her palms, as if the airplane were a living thing choosing her back. She rolled wings level and let the nose breathe. Just a breath, easing power as the wind tried to pry them sideways. The gray outside pressed until it became a texture instead of a view. The altimeter ran out of floors to descend, and the world arrived in a rush of wet sound and grit. Left main kissed first, not a thump, but a question answered. Right followed, gentled into truth with rudder and the kind of patience that makes bullets honest. The nose wheel settled last. Crosswind growled, and she held it with heel and thought, letting the caravan crab a whisper, then straightening her spine and the center line together. Reverse. The prop unclenched and clawed. Rain sheeted. Dust hissed. The runway surface became a slippery sentence. She stayed off the brakes like they were secrets. The yoke stayed back because she asked it nicely. The speed bled, and finally quit. For a heartbeat there was only the tick of cooling metal and the thin whine of systems trying to pretend the lights had never left. Then the storm's voice surged again, big and satisfied. "Nice!" Dawson said, but the word was softer than his usual. It sounded like a man who had just realized he'd been standing in the doorway while someone else lifted the heavy part. Zara kept her hands on the controls until the airplane told her it was done needing them. She eased power forward just enough to roll, turned past where the taxiway should be, and aimed for the memory of the fuel farm. No blue taxi-edged lights, no rabbit, just gut and geometry. Ray's voice tried to claw through the portable, a flicker in metal rain. Saw the pulses, barely. You in? Down and slow, Zara said. We're clear of the active. We'll shut down where the ground remembers us. They coasted to the apron by feel, the way you can find a kitchen chair in the dark if you were the one who pushed it in. Mercer emerged from the rain like a myth, arms up, flashlight clenched in his teeth. He chopped the light into signals. Zara nodded inside the cockpit and let the airplane roll until Mercer's palms flattened and the world said, "Here." Mixture to cutoff. Beacon stayed on because even in blindness, you tell people you're real. The prop's last turn shook the water off like a dog freeing itself. Silence took shape. It was the kind that makes your ears ring because they had been working too hard. Dawson exhaled into the hush. The sound was gratitude disguised as oxygen. He said, "I could have done it, but it would have been uglier," and ruined the humility by adding, "Ugly landings are still landings, but ugly can spook the people who have to keep working afterward." Zara said, "But ugly can spook the people who have to keep working afterward." He regarded her as if she'd just translated a language he'd always assumed was private. Then he nodded and reached for the door latch with a steadier hand than his pride probably liked. They stepped into rain that had finally remembered how to be rain. It flattened dust, made the air smell like creosote and hot brake pads. Ground crew jogged and hunched diagonals. Someone cheered, short and embarrassed by its own sincerity. Zara touched the cowling once, "Thank you, old friend," and followed Mercer to the cargo. Together, they bled off the last of the bladder's sag, checked straps that had held because they'd been asked to, and swung the bay open. A forklift nosed over, cautious in puddles. Men with weather in their eyebrows took the load like it was a child. Inside the ops bay, the emergency lighting had decided to try optimism. Panels glowed a stubborn orange. The UPS units hummed. Ray stood at the comms rack with a towel wrapped around her shoulders like a cape and 3 pens stuck in her braid. She was grinning and trying not to. "Couldn't see a thing. You looked like a rumor moving through milk." "We were a rumor," Dawson said, and the small admission surprised the room into a silence that felt like respect learning to walk. Zara peeled her hands off finger by finger, pocketed them to dry, and checked the rack temperatures out of habit. Her fingertips were wrinkled and smelled like storm. She ran a hand beneath one UPS and felt heat that should have had a warning sign. "Give me a Phillips," she said to no one in particular. "Top right fan's choking." Cole handed her a driver without asking why. She popped the grill, cleared wet lint by the corner of a sterile pad, and reseated the connector until the fan remembered its duty. The tone in the room shifted. It was small, but small is how big starts. "Drop a diamond if you've ever had to prove it the hard way," Ray called toward whatever phones were still live, half joking, half documenting the day. Somewhere in the digital dark, donors and lurkers would see the prompt and send little blue diamonds like applause you can count. Dawson leaned his hip into a desk and finally looked at Zara without the filter of expectation. "You flew like you'd never stopped," he said. "I never stopped breathing," she said. He almost smiled. It reached the corner of one eye and died there, not because it wasn't genuine, but because his face didn't know how to hold it yet. "Good, because we're not done." Ray's console barked as the backup mast took a gust it didn't appreciate. She caught a headset to keep it from walking. "The West repeater's gone for real. We've got gaps I can't fill with chewing gum and attitude. Fire control is calling in a Mayday relay from Border Ridge. Training compound says one of their birds put down hard near the practice strip and they can't raise the second helo. Winds have the valley in a blender. They want eyes, hands, and a way to move 2 burns and a chest wound. Wheels can't get through." "What kind of bird?" Dawson asked, already flipping to a map he knew by heart. "Trainer," Ray said. "Fixed wing.
Short field landings out there usually, but their windsock is a joke, and the downdrafts are serious." Mercer whistled through his teeth. "Helos will get slammed in that sink. Fixed wing can maybe bounce in if you've got a pilot with a clean heart and a mean right foot." Harlow limped in from the hangar, shirt sleeve taped where it had given up on being a sleeve. He gave Zara a look that was both sheepish and full of a newfound respect he didn't seem to know what to do with. "Tie-down tried to take my thumb," he said. "I told it no." "You told it late," Zara said, taking his hand, peeling back the tape she'd know wasn't hers because she would never do it that messily. She cleaned the skin with a gentle bite. He watched her work, eyes dragged back to the way she moved like a compass points north. "You going back up?" he asked, trying for nonchalance and missing. "Depends who needs what," Zara said. "We need a fixed wing at Border Ridge," Dawson said, voice back to command because that's where it lived. "The strip is 800 meters on a day when the measurement makes sense. Today it won't. We'll take the Caravan. If we don't try, those burns turn into funerals and the chest wound becomes a story someone tells when there's weather like this."
He didn't offer it like a dare this time. He offered it like a seatbelt. Zara nodded once, clipped, and moved. They loaded fast because fear makes efficiency less theoretical. Trauma packs, burn sheets, IV fluids warmed in a cooler that had been designed for beer but now did God's work. A compact oxygen kit, 2 litters, a chest tube tray. She checked each latch with fingers that had learned to think for themselves. Mercer rolled in a narrow stretcher with a suspension frame. "Pilot took a stick to the sternum," he said. "If he's breathing like a harmonica, we'll have to get an airway he won't hate us for." "Then we'll do it right," she said, packing a bougie and a blade where she could find them in the dark. The Caravan waited, rain modeling its skin. The storm had shifted tone again, less teeth at ground level, more fists punching down from the ridge as cool air spilled like angry water. Zara did the walk around because redundancy is a love language. She touched what mattered. Flaps, fuel caps, tires. She looked for the small tells that say a big thing is tired. The airplane looked back and said, "I can, if you can." Inside the cockpit, Dawson strapped in with the economy of a man who knew exactly how long each gesture took. "We'll lose GPS again once we get into the canyon," he said. "The mast can reach us for a bit, but after that we're on bearings and arithmetic." "I brought extra arithmetic," she said, setting the portable compass on the glare shield and cinching it down with a strip of tape. The needle jittered and then found its hawk stillness. She said QNH, cross-checked the standby altimeter, tuned the ADF to a borderline ancient beacon that Border Ridge kept alive like a superstition. Ray's last clear words through the portable were housekeeping with affection. "I'll pulse the field lights for the next guy if I can get them to cooperate," she said. "If I go dark, don't panic. Think of my car's oil stain and aim a little left." "Copy," Zara said. "We'll bring people back who can thank you later." They taxied through water that wanted to be a river. The runway was a dark suggestion again, more honest this time because the rain had scrubbed away the worst dust. Dawson took the takeoff. He drove the power as if he were asking a stubborn mule for one last hill. They lifted into bitey air that wanted to argue. In climb, the Caravan shivered and then settled into a conversation with physics. Zara kept her scan tight, letting her peripheral vision hold the edge of the world while the center of her eyes loved the gauges. She listened to the engine like she was reading a story aloud to a child, aware of each change in tone that meant someone had turned a page. The ridge ate the horizon. They aimed for the part of the canyon where the wind had the least leverage, where terrain on either side would confuse its worst ideas. The GPS tried to be useful and failed politely. The ADF needle, the low-tech hero, pointed like a dog that had found the scent. "Drop a Clemami if you've ever had to navigate by feel when the map decided it had better things to do," Ray would have quipped if the comms were stable. The thought made Zara's mouth tilt. Down canyon, the training strip was somewhere between a compromise and a dare. On good days, it felt like threading a needle with gloves on. On bad days, it felt like being the thread. "Wind check," Dawson said out of habit. "Wind doesn't answer questions today, but she's talking. Feel that burble? There's a shallow rotor off the south wall. If we stay center, then cheat north in the last 5 seconds, we'll avoid the worst of it."
He shot her a look that wasn't skeptical so much as intrigued. "Have you been in here before?" "Twice when the wind was telling secrets and once when it was lying. It's lying today." The canyon tightened. Rain became mist because on cliffs there's nowhere else to go. The ADF needle swung lazy left, then steadied as we crossed a shoulder. She adjusted heading 3 degrees without waiting for permission. Dawson didn't correct her. Trust had a sound, and it was the sound of a man not clearing his throat. The strip revealed itself the way an animal decides you're not a predator. It showed an edge, then another, then the long, narrow body of dirt that someone had once called a runway and meant it. At the near end, 2 trucks and a knot of men hunched in a posture that meant Payne had opinions. Halfway down, a small trainer sat at a bad angle, nose gear folded, wingtip scoured. Behind a low berm, a rotor mast poked up from where a hello had crouched to hide from the wind, its blades tethered like a horse's reins, tied short. No one waved. It was too windy to waste arms. "Obstruction midfield," Zara said. "We take it short. You good with a high sink, low flare?" "If I am, if you are," Dawson said, and his voice had respect in it like a clean engine has power. They set up for short final from a side door, slipping to lose height without losing their minds. Zara rode rudder and aileron until the airplane looked wrong and felt right. The sink rate pegged where she wanted it. She called out the last numbers without drama. 3 up, 2, 1, eyes outside. Dawson flared last than the books like. The mains found dirt that had ambition. They rolled into straightness earned by sweat. The trainer's crumpled wingtip loomed and slid by close enough that Zara could see where someone's hand had left a streak of oil and hope. They slowed to a walk and turned into a widening where the wind couldn't reach its whole arm. The men at the near end moved the way relief moves, fast and slow at once. The first casualty was a woman about Zara's age with brows that could tell stories. Burns crawled up both forearms, angry and wet. Her eyes were bright, which meant Payne was still winning, but shock hadn't emptied the room. The second was a man with the pallor of an argument he was losing inside his chest. A makeshift bandage crossed his sternum and rose on one side with each breath and fell less on the other. Bad sign. Zara took the woman first, not because she didn't care about the man, but because the burns could steal a future in minutes if you weren't rude to them. She irrigated with warmed saline from the cooler, moving the stream like a painter who hated waste. She cut melted fabric away with shears that remembered the shape of her fingers. She covered with a clean, clingy layer that would stop air from making every nerve a scream. She gave a small dose of ketamine the size of an apology, and the woman's expression eased enough to let other needs into the room. "Name?" Zara asked. "Rami," she said, then closed her eyes like she'd just told a secret to a friend. Zara turned to the man. His breaths were shallow in that way that says depth has become math. She listened, sternum to sternum, and heard a whisper on the right, nothing convincing on the left. She watched the trachea, where it sat in the throat, biased a little right. She pulled at the neck skin and felt that awful crunch that means air has started living where tissue does. "Tension pneumo left," she said, and the words made one of the men flinch like he just watched a door he didn't like open. She got the kit with the smoothness of sleep. Landmark, clean. Needle in its second intercostal midclavicular. No, wind like this was rude. She went anterior axillary at the 5th space above the rib to spare the vessels. The pop was obscene and perfect. Air rushed with gratitude. The man's shoulders loosened like he'd put something heavy down. His color made a choice for the better.
"You're going to talk about this for years," she said to him, "because sometimes telling people their future is a way to make sure it arrives." Mercer and Dawson had the litters rigged. The trainer's young co-pilot, guilt pouring off him like sweat, hovered. He looked at Zara's hands as if they were proof of a kind of magic that he hadn't known existed in this uniform. I thought we were okay," he said, voice thin with the gravity of what-ifs. "You lived," Zara said. "That's the kind you can build on." The wind barreled down the canyon and tried to fill every mouth with sand. Dawson squinted past it at the strip. "We can go out light," he said, "but if the gusts hit in the first third, we're a lawn dart." "We go now," Zara said, gentle but hard. "If we wait for perfect, we're writing letters. We'll take Romy and the chest. The second helo can try for the others when the gusts blink."
A ridge runner in a faded cap leaned in. "You taking the woman?" he asked. "She's the only mechanic who can make our old bird purr when it wants to growl." "She'll need those hands for that," Zara said, and tightened the last wrap. "Help me get them aboard." They loaded like a drill they wished they didn't need. Romy's eyes held Zara's with a steadiness that said she wanted to complain out of habit, but had decided to be grateful instead. The man with the cleared lung gave a whisper that might have been thank you if wind hadn't chewed it. Inside, the caravan smelled like damp rubber and fear trying to be brave. Zara secured the patients, ran lines where hands could reach them without the airplane getting jealous, and strapped the oxygen reservoir under a net that promised not to go exploring. She checked Romy's pain edge, brought it down a click, and positioned the burn sheets to keep the cabin air from making her skin a radio. Dawson looked at the strip like a chess player who had to move a knight while the board was on a ship. He said, "We take off down canyon. We'll get lift sooner, but we risk the rotor. Up canyon gives us clean air for 5 seconds and then the sinkhole of the gods." "Down," Zara said. "Cheat a hair north. If the rotor swats us, trade a little yaw for ground track and don't chase the nose. Let the airplane talk." He stared at her for a beat and then nodded. "All right," he said. "Let her talk." They lined up on a strip that turned into a metaphor. Zara leaned into the harness so the airplane could feel her time its heartbeat. Dawson brought power up to the point where the engine became the whole room, then a hair more. The caravan strained. The wind was a hand on its chest. They rolled. Air tried to be mischief first. The tail wagged, then remembered manners. Zara kept a boot in it that was more suggestion than command. The speed bled onto the dial. The canyon sides slid by like furniture you wanted to avoid bumping. They rotated low and ugly, the kind of lift that comes with a warning label. Then the rotor hit. It was a fist from the south wall, a shove that made the left wing suddenly wish it were light. The caravan lurched. The patients made sounds that meant trust was being asked for at an unreasonable interest rate. "Hold," Zara said, the word a bridge for both man and machine. She put in right aileron and a touch of rudder that felt like telling a child a bedtime story faster so the storm outside wouldn't become an uninvited character. The airplane responded like a friend who knows when not to argue. They punched through. The air on the other side was laminar, like a lie. Dawson kept climbing, because stopping would have been admiring their own cleverness. They cleared the canyon mouth with a margin that would make for dramatic storytelling later, and made for a sky that had fewer opinions. In the cabin, Romy blinked at the ceiling like it had said something rude. The chest wound patient breathed in a rhythm that made Zara's own chest mirror it, despite knowing better. She checked his saturation and found a number that would make a respiratory therapist sigh and then get to work. She turned the oxygen up a thumb's width. He pinked another fraction. "City in sight," Dawson said, and the relief threaded his words without taking them over. "Approach is probably still drunk. We'll do this the old-fashioned way." Old-fashioned works. Old-fashioned is why there are still stories to tell. The hospital strip was an easy target when the world cooperated. Today it was a suggestion again, but they had done harder things 15 minutes ago. They put the caravan down as if returning a borrowed thing without adding new scratches. Orderlies and a trauma team met them with the right kind of hurry. They slid Romy onto a gurney that would keep the sheets from sticking to the wrong memories and wheeled the chest patient toward a room that had light steady enough to argue with. As the doors swallowed the gurneys, Romy lifted her hand without looking and let 2 fingers brush Zara's. It was a tiny gesture. It said, "I'm coming back to my work because you were good at yours." In the shadow of the wing, Dawson leaned against the strut and finally let the rain hit his face. It looked good on him, washed his edges. "You saved them," he said, "and didn't try to take any of it." "We carried them to where saving happens," Zara said. "That counts." A siren yelped on the far side of the hospital, then cut out as if embarrassed. Inside, monitors found their rhythm again as backup power settled into a truce. Ray's voice arrived in the portable like a postcard after a war. "You two still upright?" "Upright and damp. Patients delivered. Caravan in one piece."
good because the ridge just coughed up something else, and this one has our name on it in permanent marker. Zara lifted the portable closer. Say it. Border Ridge lost their second hello, not a crash, forced set down near the old gypsum cut. Pilot's okay, crew chief is concussed and not making sense. There's also a pallet of microgrid controllers we need yesterday if the city power hiccups again, and the storm just peeled our mast like a banana. I'm shouting into a coffee can over here. Mercer jogged up, eyes bright the way they get when the day keeps refusing to be small. We barely cooled the engine, he said. We'll cool when the weather apologizes, Dawson said. He looked at Zara and didn't pretend he was making the decision alone. We go? Zara wiped rain from her eyelashes with the back of her wrist. We go. They were taxiing again before common sense could find a seat. The caravan felt heavier because fatigue is a weight you only notice when you take your hand off it. The checklists came out of their mouths automatically, two voices that decided harmony was allowed. Comment, I would trust you if you'd want Zara in your cockpit on a day like this, Ray would have said to the stream if she had a stream. That thought made Dawson chuckle, an accidental sound. Takeoff was a handshake with a bully that had started to tire. They climbed along the freeway to cheat the worst of the sink. The ridge was a darker gray now, the kind that means the day is considering exchanging rain for teeth. The gypsum cut lay like a bite mark in the hillside. Somewhere down inside it, a hello huddled near a slumped pile of gypsum as if trying to look smaller so the wind would forget it existed. The portable radio sputtered and then behaved for 6 words. Aegis, hello 2, set down, cut, crew, okay, rotor, fouled, need lift, need hands. Copy, Dawson said, and his professionalism covered the gap where empathy wanted to spill. We're 2 minutes out. Pop smoke if you have it. If not, wave something that doesn't cost us a rotor. The cut opened like a wound. White rock glowed under rain. The hello huddled near a slumped pile of gypsum as if trying to look smaller so the wind would forget it existed. 2 figures in safety orange waved without hope of being dramatic. No runway, Dawson said flatly. We make one, Zara said, and pointed at an apron of compacted white that a century of trucks had hammered into something like a promise. There, downhill a click, then it flattens. We can get in and out with a hair and a prayer. He didn't argue. There wasn't time, and also he was starting to like the taste of trusting her. They brought the caravan in dirt low and full of choreography. The mains met gypsum like they had shaken hands before and remembered it pleasantly. They rolled to where the hello sulked and stopped in a spray that would look cinematic later if anyone edited this day. The crew chief was a big man with a cut on his scalp that pretended to be important. His eyes were glassy. He smiled at Zara with the same slow stretch her father's old dog used to make when he recognized a whistle. "Ma'am," he said, then tried to salute and poked himself in the eyebrow instead.
The pilot was fine, except for the kind of shame injuries that don't bleed. Lost pedal authority in a gust, he said. I set her down before she decided for me. Tails kissed a stump. Didn't want to try for a hop and end up shopping for rotor blades we can't afford. You made the right call, Dawson said. We'll bring you a tow or a box of miracles when the wind makes up its mind. The pallet of microgrid controllers sat like a stack of intelligent bricks. They had the shape of salvation for people who wanted their air to be conditioned again. Mercer and Zara built a ramp out of the things the helo carried that were willing to become architecture and slid the pallet into the caravan's belly like convincing a cat into a carrier. Weight and balance? Dawson asked, because even respect for miracles wants numbers. Zara did the math with her mouth barely moving. We're legal if we treat ourselves like gentlemen on rotation, she said, and if the wind keeps pretending to be friendly. He grimaced. The wind is not friendly. She can be negotiated with, Zara said. They turned the caravan on the white pad that had been a truck route and now was a runway, because need said so. The sky above the cut had changed personalities again. Dark smudges walked the ridges. The smell of ozone said lightning was shopping for a place to land. They rolled. The caravan took a breath, then another. The apron gave them speed with a generosity that surprised even Zara.
They rotated into a gust that tried to hold them like a jealous lover, then let go with a spiteful slap. The airplane skipped, caught itself, and climbed. At 500 feet, the rain became knives. At 1,000, lightning stitched the ridge behind them with a seamstress's precision and a drunk's aim. The portable radio squealed. Ray's voice was all static and certain words. Dort, gid, critical, hospital, hold. Say again, Dawson said, as if asking the weather to be polite ever did anything. The lightning didn't care. It found the mast they had left at Aegis and made its opinions known in a light that would haunt the room's wiring for weeks. In the caravan, the number 2 alternator hiccuped and then steadied. The compass quivered, recovered. The engine kept singing. Then the panel went half dead. Lights on the right side of the stack dimmed to the color of a bruise. The backup stayed readable but sulked. The VHF gave up entirely, tired of pretending its voice could carry. Dawson swore without creativity. "We're back to caves and fire," he said. "Caves are shelters if you change your idea of a house," Zara said. She leaned forward a fraction, as if that could move the airplane's center of the world. "We've got the best piece of tech people forget." "What?" "Out the window," she said. The city had begun to flicker beneath the weather in large, meaningful patches. Whole districts pulsed and then calmed, a body whose heart had strong opinions about rhythm. Somewhere in that map, the hospital waited for the microgrid controllers like a person waits for a hand to hold in the dark. "We'll deliver and then—" He didn't finish. Something went through the prop arc with the sound of a handful of gravel thrown into a fan. Rain, yes, but heavier. The engine coughed once, a wet dog clearing its throat. It smoothed. Then coughed again, longer, flirting with the idea of quitting. Water ingestion from the hardest rain, maybe? Or a transient short whispering to a sensor hell-bent on drama? Or something the engine would never confess? Zara's hands moved before thought could compile a plan. Mixture of feather richer to keep combustion honest, prop lever a hair to arrange the manuals didn't print in bold, throttle not up, not down, right. The engine considered her terms. "Hold her," Dawson said, but the way he said it suggested he already knew who had the airplane. The engine cleared and then sputtered again, a longer hesitation with intent. They were 3 minutes from the field if time did not become a liar. Zara felt the airplane the way some people feel weather in their knees. She reached for the alternate air lever and pulled. The engine gulped different air, warmer, less choked with knives. The cough became a grumble, and then a moody hum. "Nice," Dawson said, and the compliment wasn't about his status anymore. It was about survival. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We still have to land with half a panel and a storm that thinks we're a rumor." A flare of lightning stitched the southern sky, and in its brief, unfair light showed them the city's airport like a skeleton under skin. Then darkness returned, thicker for having been interrupted. "Approach is gone," Dawson said. "Tower's a lighthouse with a blown bulb." "Then we're sailors," Zara said quietly. She set a descent that would bring them to the place where instinct meets runway. The portable radio coughed a final message before it too decided to nap. Ray's voice, small and stubborn. "Field lights. 1 pulse. Timing off. 30 seconds. Watch. For me." Zara checked her watch and counted in her head to the rhythm of the breath that used to be her father's counting cadence. She rolled out on an imaginary final and held the yoke like she dearly loved it but wouldn't be sentimental in a fight. 30 seconds became a superstition. The lights pulsed once, and she saw enough to call a life. Threshold, a darker darkness where the runway tried to be honest. The wind shoved, sulked, tried again. Zara let the airplane be an animal and then tamed it between thoughts. They sank toward a black ribbon that might move if the city changed its mind. The prop bit wet air and threw it behind them like so much bad intention. The engine hummed a sullen hymn. The panel glowed as if remembering a favorite song. "Now," Dawson said, meaning everything. Flare, faith, finish. Zara aligned a thing she could not see with a place she felt more than she knew.
The wind chose that moment to change politics. A gust hit from the right, hard and lazy. The nose slewed left. The left wing wanted to be higher now. She corrected without asking permission from any gods. The mains were a whisper from commitment. Something moved on the runway. A rectangle, no, a cart, pushed by a man who either didn't know or didn't care what airplane math means. He was a smear in the margins of the one heartbeat of light they had been gifted. Zara had half a second, a plane full of people, a palette of salvation, and a runway turning into a story with two endings. She chose. She kicked in rudder, dropped a wing 1.5 degrees, and let the mains touch 3 yards left of where they had the right to be. The cart missed a wheel by the width of a prayer. The caravan's suspension took an opinionated bounce, the kind you can feel in your teeth. The nose came down like a decision. They were on. Brakes, reverse. Not too much, or they'd skate into the taxiway like a drunk at a wedding. Enough to make the airplane believe they meant it. The cart vanished behind the wing with a man attached whose future contained a lecture. They slowed. The runway kept being a runway. The lights stayed dead. The world finally remembered to be large in a good way. Zara's hands shook only after the caravan had stopped trying to go places on its own. They turned off onto the apron by sonar memory. Ground appeared with flashlights and opinions. The microgrid pallet rode a forklift toward a truck whose driver looked like a man who would name his tools. Dawson stared at Zara with eyes that had run out of reasons to be coy. "I won't ask if you still remember how to fly," he said. "I'm going to ask if you'll teach me the part where you make the world smaller without being cruel to it." She let the words sit until they stopped being about him and started being about the day. "We can make time," she said. The hangar doors took the men like a big animal that had been shot at and had decided to trust them anyway. Inside, the generator's song changed key as the microgrid controllers came online. Lights brightened around the edges the way hope does. A coffee machine sputtered awake, spitting steam like a victory flag. Ray came pelting in, soaked to the shin, hair doing things beyond the mandate of elastics. She grabbed Zara around the shoulders in a hug that acknowledged both the day and the future in one press. "You pulled off 3 miracles and changed a room," she said into Zara's wet shirt. Zara laughed, a small, tired sound that still had teeth. "We pulled," she corrected. "Miracles don't like to travel alone." Mercer clapped Dawson on the back with a thud that was as much punctuation as greeting. "I'll refill the bladder and tell the forklift to be nice to my back. Then I'm going to sit down somewhere inappropriate for 3 minutes and think about noodles." "Noodles," Harlow echoed from a chair where he had arranged his dignity like a coat. "We owe Quinn the good ones." Zara shook rain from her hair and checked the med bay without thinking about checking it. Supplies were diminished in the right places. The UPS fans she coaxed back were holding. She wrote a note for the night crew in her neat, unshowy hand. "Check mast base for arcing. Reseat connectors. Inventory burn dressings. Hydrate yourselves." Ray's console showed a map that was beginning to look like a city instead of a rumor. Green dots blinked where substations remembered their jobs. A thick line pulsed along the hospital's edge. Power routing adjusted. Demand obeyed. Then the alarms started again. Not the piercing winter of fire, not the brassy trumpet of perimeter breach. This was the lean, fast beep of air traffic that had lost the plot. Ray snapped to the board. "We have a transponder squawking 7700 without voice. Single-engine piston, 12 miles east-northeast, altitude varying, speed inconsistent. Someone is up there dying of 100 small cuts and doesn't know which one is fatal." Dawson's mouth set. "Where's Rescue 1? "Hanging in the cradle until the wind stops playing judge and jury," Ray said. Her eyes found Zara like iron filings find a magnet. "If we could get a pilot up in something that can talk to a lost soul and hold a light, we might keep them from scattering themselves across my map." Mercer looked at the caravan with a degree of love he usually reserved for good food. "We're barely cooled," he said again, a new prayer. Zara's palms were still damp. Her heart had started to believe the room was safe, and now had to be told it wasn't. She felt the weight of the day along her spine like a pack she hadn't planned for, but had trained to carry. "Who is it?" she asked. Ray squinted at the trembling numeral river. "Registration returns to a woman who filed a local training pattern this morning. No cancel, no reply. Storm hate all the towers that know how to comfort. We're the loudest friend she has left." Dawson's glance toward the apron. Rain fell with purpose again, but the teeth had been filed by fatigue. "We can go," he said. "But if she can't hear, we'll be flying formation with a ghost." "Then we'll be a ghost that knows the way home," Zara said. She felt for the tags at her collarbone and found them warm against her skin. Anchors small enough to hide, heavy enough to matter. Her father's coin pressed a truth through fabric. Her mother's caduceus traced the shape of duty. "Let's brief while we walk," she said, and the room moved with them because that's what rooms do when someone finally asked the right thing in the right tone. They stepped into the rain that had stopped pretending to be subtle. Above them, somewhere invisible, a single engine made a faltering sound like a heart trying to remember its own name. And then, out past the end of the runway, where the eucalyptus leaned into the weather like old men in a bar, a light appeared, small, trembling, and wrong. It was too low. It was headed straight for the dark water beyond the field. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you.
Dawson joined them, balanced on his heels like a man trying on a new stance. "I put in a request," he said. "There's a slot open next month for an internal check ride. Technically, it's for line pilots looking to add instructing, but there's an exception clause for personnel cross-qualifying. If you want it, it's yours. If you don't, I'll pretend I didn't ask." "Why me?" Zara asked. Not because she didn't know, but because she wanted to hear the answer in his mouth. "Because I watched you make 5 decisions in a row that turned an impossible day into a manageable one," he said. "Because you fly like your body did the math before your brain. Because people who don't know machines believed them because you did. And because I would like to learn the part where breathing is a plan." She looked past him at the line of trucks, pretending to be runway lights. At Liv sitting now with a blanket around her shoulders in a posture that said she had decided to continue. At Ray's braid shedding pens like confetti. "Okay," she said. "But if I do it, I get to rewrite your checklist to sound like we wrote them for people, not for paper." He grinned, the kind of grin that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with relief. "Deal." Ray wandered up with the portable dangling off her wrist. "You two done proposing?" she asked. "Because I think the Storm is thinking about leaving, and if she's going, I want to be the one to hold the door." "Hold it," Zara said, "and tell her we're not mad, just tired." They did one last sweep of the field, because doing a thing right once means setting it up for the next person. They coiled hoses, counted flares they hadn't used, rechecked the mast base for arcing, logged what had failed and what had surprised them by holding. In the quiet that follows usefulness, Zara found Ray at the edge of the hangar looking up. "What are you counting?" Zara asked. "Reasons," Ray said, "for keeping doing this. Today added a few." Zara leaned against the door jamb and let the air dry the sweat at the base of her neck. She thought of the brass coin against her collarbone, and the stainless steel caduceus, and the way those two metals had warmed to the same temperature. "You're going to be a legend here by lunch. You okay with that?" Legends are stories people tell to make their own hands feel steadier. If it helps a new tech put a tourniquet on without worrying what someone thinks of their elbows, I'll survive the talk. Ray smiled. small and fierce. "You always had a way with elbows. Drop a diamond if you'd want us on your worst day," Zara said, half to Ray, half to the wind. "And drink some water." The night unclenched by degrees. The storm, done with its theater, moved downrange to scare a different county. The air smelled like the inside of a seashell, and the dust after a good rain. The runway lights, persuasion plus microgrids plus luck, flickered once and came on to a polite medium. Dawson tapped his watch. "Sunrise in 50, he said. "I suggest we pretend we're people who sleep." Harlow, who had the face of a man who could nap on a fence, raised a finger. "Let the record show I endorsed this plan early." They turned the hangar into a campsite. Cots drug where shadows felt protective, jackets as pillows, a row of boots pointing toward the door like they wanted to be first if called. Someone found a speaker with a battery that still cared and put on a playlist that thought it knew what courage sounds like. Liv approached Zara with the careful steps of a person who has spent too long on one kind of decision and now must make another. "Can I ask you something?" she asked. "You can ask me too," Zara said. "Were you scared?" She considered being noble and then decided honesty was the right mirror. "Yes," she said. "The kind of scared that keeps your eyes open without asking and makes time behave oddly." "But your hands didn't shake." "They shook later. Shaking is just your body letting out the extra current. It doesn't mean anything about before." Liv nodded. She looked at Zara's hands. "I want mine to do what yours did." "They will," Zara said. "You flew through a night that wanted to make you small and you stayed the size you needed to be. That's the whole trek." Liv breathed, an experiment that became truth. "Thank you," she said, "for the hand and the light. Thank the part of you that decided to follow." By the time dawn saw fit to show a seam on the eastern edge, the field looked less like a place that had survived and more like a place that planned to. The microgrids hummed a contented chord. The tower, still dark but less sullen, had a ladder leaning against its spine and a technician whose posture said today would be the day it remembered its purpose. Zara stood at the edge of the tarmac and watched the light find wet concrete. The day smelled of coffee and debriefs, and the particular clean after a hard night. Dawson joined her, silent in the way that means there are words and they are being lined up carefully. "You said earlier you needed me to make room. I will. Not as charity, as calibration." She looked at him and saw that the laugh had gone somewhere useful and left something better behind. "Then we're calibrated," she said. He offered a hand, not the grip of a pact, but the handshake of colleagues. She took it, and her palm was warm and scarred in small, invisible ways. They turned toward the hangar where Ray was already calling them names for sitting still during a debrief window. Mercer handed out clipboards with a pen clipped sideways like a shrug. The debrief was the kind of honest that makes the next day better. They listed what failed. They celebrated what held. They told the truth about mistakes without turning them into weapons. They promised to fix things not because they had been shamed, but because it was the way work works when you want to be trusted by your own hands. At the end, Ray pointed at the whiteboard where someone had drawn a crooked heart. "Who drew that?" she asked. Harlow, guilty as the day is long, raised his hand. "I was aiming for a circle," he said. The room laughed, and the laughter sat down with them and had a bowl of terrible noodles and decided to stay. Later, when the field had returned to the kind of busy that looks like boredom unless you know how much it costs to maintain, Zara cleaned her stapler again and put her tape where it belonged and rewrote a checklist to sound like a human had intended it. She added a line at the bottom in small letters. "Remember to breathe." Ray found her at the bench and read over her shoulder and tapped the line. "Best part," she said. Liv came live with a giz nobody needs, but everyone keeps. A card. Inside, she had written 2 words with careful ink. Thank you. She tucked it behind the brass coin and the caduceus on the chain at her throat. It felt like the three objects knew each other. Dawson, passing by, said, "Lesson at 1400 if you want to start making a liar out of my bad habits." "I always want that," she said. He went away grinning like a man who had found another way to be useful. When Noon drew a straight line at the foot of the hangar doors, Zara walked out to the caravan and laid her palm on its skin. The metal was warm now, obedient to sunlight. She whispered a thanks that she did not need language for. The day would get busy again. They would carry more things heavy and small. They would fix more fans with the corner of a sterile pad. They would tune more comms that did not want to cooperate until they understood the value of cooperation. And always, they would breathe.